Introducing G-Core Managed Kubernetes, the ultimate solution for streamlined Kubernetes management. Experience support for bare metal nodes and a robust 99.9 uptime SLA at no extra cost. Easily provision Kubernetes clusters with a single click using our intuitive dashboard, API, or Terraform. Seamlessly integrate with G-Core external DNS and easily provision block volumes for your storage requirements. And of course, stay up to date with the latest Kubernetes versions. Plus, we have an exclusive offer for you. Click the link in the show notes and use the promo code Cloudcast and receive a £100 credit to try G-Core services today. Use the promo code Cloudcast and receive a $100 credit with G-Core services today.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it is Aaron for Cloud News this week. And I cannot believe it's August, but here we are. And I will say this, even though all of our friends and listeners over in Europe are probably still on holiday, here in the United States, summer is starting to wrap up a little bit, and cloud news is significantly picking up. I mean, we have a number of stories to talk about. But before we get into the news, we do want to tell everyone you need to stick around, because Dave Vellante, co-founder and co-CEO of SiliconANGLE and co-host of theCUBE, he's going to be giving an update to everyone on SuperCloud and their SuperCloud 3 event that just happened. With that, we're going to jump right into cloud news. It is cloud earnings seasons, and both Microsoft and Google reported. So let's jump into a couple of those. First of all, Azure revenue grew 26% during the quarter, faster than 27% from the previous quarter and 40% year over year. It was interesting because they tended to beat some of the analysts' expectations, but still were disappointed in other areas as well. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and read the full article. And then moving on to Google, and they had some good numbers as well. But probably more interesting is, and maybe this is just going to be everyone's earnings calls for a little while, they mentioned AI repeatedly, at least 80 times according to the article linked in the show notes. And they are, like many others, are going to be integrating AI throughout their portfolio. But what do the numbers look like? Well, the Google Cloud division itself turned its first ever operating profit a couple quarters ago now, but this quarter a pretty healthy profit at this point, $395 million. And if we compare that against a year ago, it had a $590 million loss compared to a year ago. So they seem to be moving the needle in the right direction, and we'll certainly keep an eye on them going forward. For our next article, Kubeflow. So if you're not familiar with Kubeflow, CNCF project, and Kubeflow received incubator status. So good advancements there. And if you're not familiar with it, at the end of the day, what we're doing here is this is all about machine learning deployments and workflows, and how to make those simple and portable. A little bit of support for everything in here. Jupyter notebooks. So go ahead and creating those notebooks is supported there. TensorFlow model training is included, as well as model serving, and the creation of what they're calling Kubeflow pipelines. So comprehensive solution for deploying and managing end-to-end really workflows and operations for machine learning. And in addition to that, support for PyTorch, Apache MXNet, and Istio, and Pachyderm, among other things. So if that is of interest to you, certainly go over to the CNCF community and check that one out. For our last news article, who says there isn't any money in observability? New Relic was purchased this week by Francisco Partners and TPG to the tune of $6.5 billion. Yes, you heard that right, $6.5 billion. So about $87 per share in cash, about a 26% premium on the stock, and certainly a good exit, if you want to call it that, for them. But I'm going to go ahead and be taking them private. With that, I'm going to wrap up cloud news for this week. But as I mentioned, there is a lot of articles I wasn't able to get to this week that I really wanted to. A couple highlights here quickly. OpenAI lawyers, they're on a hiring spree. Of course, with everything that's going on with them, they're getting lots of attention, and it means lots of lawsuits. So they're hiring a bunch of lawyers. There was a really interesting article over in the A16Z blog about AI and AI in gaming, which I really wanted to get to because I found that super interesting. But hey, definitely if you're interested in that, go check it out. There's something on event-driven architectures. Stack Overflow came out with something really interesting. They came out with Overflow AI, and then kind of a counterpoint to that, Stack Overflow CEO doesn't quite understand Stack Overflow. So it's an opinion piece that I found was a really interesting write-up about that. And lastly, Intel CEO, of course, just like I mentioned in the Google earnings, hey, Intel CEO, we're building AI into everything. So if you want to read about how they're going to do that, go ahead and click that in Cloud News. So I'm going to wrap up Cloud News with that. And as I mentioned, coming up right after the break, we have Dave Vellante to give us an update on SuperCloud.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the latest trends in enterprise tech? Look no further than the Breaking Analysis podcast with Dave Vellante. This data-driven program dives into the most important topics facing the enterprise tech industry today. With a data-first approach that leverages ETR's renowned surveys of IT decision-makers and insight from the CUBE community, Breaking Analysis delivers in-depth research on the most important topics facing technologists and IT buyers. Whether you're a business leader, an IT professional, investor, or just an avid follower of the industry, this podcast is a must-listen. Just search Breaking Analysis Podcast wherever you get your podcast and tune in today to stay ahead of the game in enterprise tech. Today's show is sponsored by Panoptica. Panoptica simplifies container deployment, monitoring, and security, protecting the entire application stack from build to runtime. Scalable across clusters and multi-cloud environments, Panoptica secures containers, serverless APIs, and Kubernetes with a unified view, reducing operational complexity and promoting collaboration by integrating with commonly used developer, SRE, and SecOps tools. Panoptica ensures compliance with regulatory mandates and CIS benchmarks for best practice conformity. Privacy teams can monitor API traffic and identify sensitive data while identifying open source components vulnerable to attacks that require patching. Proactively addressing security issues with Panoptica allows businesses to focus on mitigating critical risks and protecting their interest. Learn more about Panoptica today at panoptica.app. That's panoptica.app. And we're back. And Aaron, good to be back with you, man. I know you and I have been bouncing around different places for the summer. How you been lately?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. Yeah, summer vacations are, for us, kind of sort of over. And as we mentioned on the show more than once, we've got, at this point, multiple kids going to college pretty soon. So it's a little busy, actually.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. You're becoming an empty nester here pretty soon, and me too. I'm starting that process here in a couple of weeks. So yeah, lots going on, but also lots going on in the tech world. You and I have talked. We did a show a couple of weeks ago with the folks from Confluent, and we talked about their new cloud service, their new Kafka cloud service. Which, the crux of it was they basically were like, "Look, we have this really cool technology that a lot of people use, but we are going to have to completely redesign it. Not because the technology is broken, but the way that we want to deliver it as a cloud service isn't what we think in terms of what they think the future of a cloud service looks like." And, it got me thinking again. It's been a few months. Actually, it's been more than a few months. It's been almost more than a year now that we've talked about sort of the concept of SuperCloud, and this thing that has various definitions. If you've listened to the show for a while, we've talked about it. If you haven't listened before, this is probably going to be a little bit of a new concept for you. But Aaron, the SuperCloud event is going on right around now, and we wanted to kind of dig into that. So joining us from the massive Cloudcast studios, the massive SuperCloud studios in Boston, Massachusetts, great friend of the show, Dave Vellante. Welcome back, Dave. It's good to hear from you. How are you?
Hey guys, I'm doing great. And listen, I'll tell you, the kids, they come back. Don't worry, they'll be back.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah. Well, for everybody, I know a lot of folks are going to be super familiar with you, Dave. You are co-founder of SiliconANGLE Media with John Furrier. You're the host of theCUBE. If anybody pays attention to any events, your face is all over the place because you're covering it. Like you like to say, you're sort of you guys produce sort of the ESPN of tech. But for anybody that may not know you, just kind of give us a sense of what is this SuperCloud thing that you sort of pioneered a few years ago and has become a rolling event and really kind of a topic that comes up all the time as new services pop up on the internet.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on again, guys. And Brian, as you and I talked about last time, this idea of SuperCloud, it sort of came out of, it was late 2021. We were getting ready for reInvent, and we were observing that the ecosystem was starting to do a lot more across cloud, doing things to make multi-cloud simpler. And so John and I were noodling on our reInvent preview, and we had seen Jerry Chen wrote a piece on just clouds. He called it subclouds. He was looking for opportunities. Jerry Chen's an investor at Greylock. And he was basically saying his premise was, hey, just because the clouds are dominating doesn't mean there's not a lot of pockets of opportunity out there. There's all these subclouds. And we started noodling on it. We said, there's something else going on. It's like we looked at guys like Snowflake, which were making the cloud experience consistent through an abstraction layer across clouds. And we said it's really above. And so we sort of were noodling on the word, to find that word. And we sort of landed on the Latin of super, above, supra. And so that's how we came up with SuperCloud. And then, of course, it became this superlative, which created a lot of noise in the industry and, a lot of some of it negative and actually a lot of it negative, but because it's such a catalyst for, that's just a marketing term, which it is, but it also has meaning. And so we were challenged, particularly by a guy named Charles Fitzgerald, who writes Platformonomics, awesome blog if you guys don't read it. And he said, what are you guys talking about? You got to define this if you're going to throw it out there. And so we did. So we put it out to the community, and that's what SuperCloud 1 was all about. It was really trying to test the viability of the concept and define it as this abstraction layer that creates a consistent experience across clouds.
Yeah.
And Dave, let me jump in there then as well. And so now you have this event and you recently had SuperCloud 3, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But first of all, so we went to the concept and now there's an event that follows the concept. Tell everyone a little bit about the event, the iteration of the event, how it came to be. And then let's talk about SuperCloud 3. What were some of the big trends for that event?
Yeah, so SuperCloud 1, it was all about, like you say, defining and just sort of vetting the technical feasibility. And we got, actually, it was fantastic. You guys talking about Confluent. Will DeForest actually spoke at SuperCloud 1. We had Mohit Aron, Adrian Cockcroft. We had Jerry Chen, Benoit Dajaville from Snowflake, and a number of other industry folks. And it was kind of it was kind of a vendor fest in a way, but we wanted to get to the technical merits of the concept. Kit Colbert came in and he presented a white paper on his vision of what VMware calls cross-cloud. And so I think we left that thinking, okay, there is something here for sure, it's happening. And in SuperCloud 2, we really tried to take a practitioner view and we focused on data. So the feature of that one was Jack Greenfield from Walmart talked about their triplet model, if you're familiar with it. And of course, we call it a SuperCloud. They don't use that term. But they basically have an OpenStack on-prem system that connects to a Google Cloud, and also they do a lot of their collaboration work in the Microsoft Cloud. Of course, it's Walmart, so they don't use Amazon. But what they did is they wrote a custom PaaS layer for the developers to have a consistent experience across cloud. And then we had Veronica Durgan from Saks on talking about her needs and how she wants to use different data types across clouds. We had other practitioners talking about how multi-cloud's too complicated, so they just do mono cloud. And we really tested that concept. So that was really good. And then SuperCloud 3 was all about security and AI. And so we had George Kurtz from CrowdStrike. We had Jay Chaudhry from Zscaler. We had Jay Parrick from Lacework and dozens and dozens and dozens of people. And the format is we have people come into the studio live in our Palo Alto studio, and then we inject pre-records in from the weeks before to really try to understand, what the key issues of the day. And really, this one was about security and how AI is being used. And I'd be happy to get into some of the takeaways.
Yeah. Yeah. The security piece is super interesting because obviously security, has a ton of different facets, but to a certain extent, we always tend to think about security as like, well, what can I control? What's the sort of the field that I'm dealing with? And when we get into the concept of SuperCloud or even just cross cloud or multiple clouds, you start getting into sort of there's so much more that I can't control, I don't have visibility into. I'm curious, how these folks who, Laceworks or the CDN companies or anybody who, have kind of come up somewhat in that traditional security, how they're, I mean, are they looking at this as sort of they have to break everything from a security perspective, or do they look at this as sort of additive to what they do? I'm curious how some of these sort of rigid domains are starting to think about this new abstracted world.
That's a great question, Brian. It's like, and I think the answer is both. So if you take someone like, mentioned CDN, so if Matthew Prince came on, and basically I think his view would be it's a complete do-over, and we're doing it over, creating a new type of network, a new type of cloud, new type of internet. And then I think you have others like Palo Alto Networks, which, obviously had a huge install base. It started in, firewalls basically, and has been doing a lot of acquisitions and then doing the work to essentially create that common experience across clouds. And so I think on the one hand, you've got these disruptors. Lacework would be another one that's saying, okay, we're approaching this as a data problem and coming at it with a novel perspective. But of course, they don't have the stack maturity of like a Palo Alto, and they don't have as much capability. I think Zscaler would be another one where they're basically saying, hey, just run everything through our cloud. We'll be that abstraction layer. And again, there's merits to that, but they can't be all things to all people. In fact, Jay Chaudhry even said, look, you've got to be best of breed. And he sort of implied that you can't be best of breed and have a full portfolio as well. It's kind of a shot at Palo Alto without mentioning them.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is, I think Palo Alto would say, like a Howie Shu came in. He's now at Palo Alto Networks. He left Zscaler. I think he would say, hey, we essentially want to be an AI company. So we want to drive AI throughout the entire stack and transform our business kind of the same way that Microsoft transformed its business at a smaller scale. So the short answer is really both.
Yeah. And and Dave, if we kind of step back for a second, excuse me, this feels like, although, I mean, don't get me wrong, everything is AI these days, and I don't know that we've reached peak hype cycle on AI yet, but we're getting there. But this, AI combined with data, combined with a new security model, combined with cross clouds and super clouds, like it almost feels like an entire new way we're doing things going forward, right? This new focus on AI just seems to be tip of the iceberg on new light on, I guess, location of data and how well these models are, and then securing these models. And so how do you see all of this coming together within this concept of SuperCloud with AI kind of thrown in as well?
So a couple things there is, first of all, I think it's really chaotic. And I think this chaos could be really problematic and could be a real blocker to achieving this SuperCloud vision. When you think about, first of all, the hyperscalers generally don't like the term SuperCloud because they think they're the SuperCloud. But the reality is you can't have a SuperCloud concept without the clouds. So number one. Number two is they're all dominant in AI. You think about Amazon, even before Bedrock, what it was doing, the SageMaker had a very strong position. Obviously, Google. Microsoft was like kind of nowhere. And then all of a sudden with the OpenAI deal, now all of a sudden they've leapfrogged everybody and they're like number one in mind share and capability. So you have the combination of cross cloud chaos now with AI and generally, but specifically large language models. So you have all this Gen AI diversity, which is making things worse. And then Jeff Jonas had a phrase which I thought was great. He said, "Entropy is winning." Basically, for your second law of thermodynamics fans, randomness in data is essentially creating even more chaos. And so it's a very difficult situation right now. And the last thing I'll say to this is, generative AI is generative. So it doesn't give you the same answer every time. As a result, you don't want to be relying on, Gen AI to tell you what to do with your security. And so we're really in the early days, like you said, it's hype cycle time. But at the same time, though, Aaron, the data shows that everybody's deploying Gen AI in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I know you guys came out of the show, and one of the themes you were talking about, just kind of building on this idea of chaos was whenever there's sort of chaos, the hackers have a greater advantage than they had before, right? Like we've talked with security folks on the show, and Aaron and I are the first to sort of say, like, look, I know enough about security to be dangerous, but I don't know enough to be an expert. And the thing that, smart security folks always tell us, they say, look, the thing you have to understand first and foremost is, if you are a security professional, you basically have to bat 1,000, and the hackers only have to, get it right once every however many. And I think you guys came out of this show saying, look, there's this sort of chaos going on now between maybe companies don't have the budgets they had before. You've got this generative AI thing kind of floating around, confusing people a little bit. Did you get a sense that people are like, the hackers may get another bump out of this? The kind of risk is going to go up somewhat, just because when you marry lower budgets plus a little bit of technology chaos, things might get a little crazier than normal.
Yeah, the SiliconANGLE editors, Brian, before the show, we were doing a lot of writing and journalism and stuff. They asked all the practitioners that they talked to, and even the CEOs, what they thought. Does this help defenders or attackers more? And I ran a little Twitter survey and LinkedIn survey to try to get that. But generally, the consensus was right now in the short term, it's definitely helping attackers. And I think that's pretty clear, because they didn't have access to as much technology as they do now, then all of a sudden overnight. And the other thing I'll mention is that people were saying zero trust is really hard, especially when you do try to do it across clouds. And so nobody can claim, okay, yeah, we've nailed zero trust. And so they're sort of putting it together in a mosaic, and that means there's a lot of holes in the puzzle. And it was interesting in my Twitter and LinkedIn polls. Generally, the consensus was that AI ultimately is going to be, equally advantageous to attackers and defenders. Although more folks said it was a benefit to attackers than defenders long term. I personally think that near term it's going to benefit attackers, and then what it's going to do is it's going to compress the whole cat and mouse game. Like it seems like everything in our market today is accelerated and compressed.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, Dave, let me flip back to the AI one for a second on you. So, one of the big things that I'm personally seeing is just expenses with CAPEX, and also limited inventory on GPUs to do AI, right? And so, do we see a scenario in which, basically the big three hyperclouds are going to get a monopoly on it because of inventory or because of the CAPEX required? Like, where do you see all of the economic challenges happening, and how do you see that potentially playing out from an infrastructure standpoint of are we going to reach this AI bottleneck sometime soon?
Yeah, so as you guys probably know, my Breaking Analysis, there was a weekly series. I have this data partner called ETR, and they do these quarterly surveys. And if you look at the data during the pandemic, the big four area sectors, they were spending in a lot of different places, but the big four were AI, containers, RPA, interestingly enough, and then cloud migration. And that held up during the pandemic. And then when we sort of came out of the pandemic and we started to get Fed tightening and Ukraine, what you saw all four of those started to get depressed. Containers still, pretty popular, but all four of them started to get depressed. And what happened is it bottomed, AI in particular, bottomed the month before ChatGPT was announced. And then it shot back up. And now it's the number one sector in terms of not size, but in terms of spending momentum. In other words, the percentage of customers that are spending more on the tech. And it's had a negative impact because of exactly what you're saying, Aaron. People have to make choices, and there's budget constraints. And so, CFOs saying this is how much you have to spend, and we're seeing a definite shift to AI at the expense of other areas. RPAs come down a little bit. You're seeing cloud optimization take hold. Even security, despite it being the number one priority, everything else has come down, and budgets are coming down. And so yet AI is popping back up in terms of spending velocity. So people are having to make those trade-offs. And honestly, I don't think they've figured it out yet. They can say there's a lot of hype, but they don't really know what to do. If you ask them what they're doing with it, they're doing all the stuff that you and I are doing with things like ChatGPT and Bard. They're summarizing documents. They're having it write marketing copy. They're having it, help them write code, all the things that you would think that we do, but it's really not necessarily attacking their security problem yet, anyway.
Yeah, it's well, and the security thing is hard. I mean, it's I worked years and years ago. I can't get into all the details, but I worked for a company that was trying to basically build a security product that was like, hey, we want to deal with like 0-day exploits. So essentially, it's sort of predicting what the next thing was going to look like, because most security products are based on, well, I knew what a signature looked like, or I knew what a pattern looked like. So therefore, I'll put a filter in for that, or a block in for that. Yeah, I mean, the idea of security with generative AI, yeah, it can probably cover a lot of low hanging fruit. Make sure your access lists are right, or pull some best practice stuff. But yeah, the predicting the future of it, and like you said, Dave, it's generative. It's not always right, and people, especially in the security domain, expect sort of like it's black and white. It's either it gets through or it doesn't get through. Not well, maybe this time it will, and maybe next time it won't.
And to answer Aaron's other question, I think the cloud guys are definitely going to be. Put it this way, I think there's going to be a few dominant large language models. The big three clouds, OpenAI, maybe throwing in Anthropic, and a couple others maybe vie for it. There's going to be a lot of smaller use of AI and inferencing at the edge, and it's amazing, but it's really unclear how that's going to shake out. But I do think the big three clouds are in a very strong position. And then the other thing we had data on was we crossed who's using AI and who's in the best position from a security standpoint. And not surprising, the guys who popped up were Zscaler, Okta, CrowdStrike, and Palo Alto had the highest affinity around AI. And then you had Cloudflare pretty high. And then Cisco was the other one that looms large. And then you have like a zillion other companies that are benefiting, security companies that are benefiting from AI. And it's just still such a crowded space. And I think, consolidation and M&A is a clear trend that everybody's seeing.
Right. One of the things, one of the big concept of SuperClouds is this idea of sort of abstracting, multiple clouds, or abstracting location. We saw this week VMware announce something called sort of a sovereign cloud, or sovereign cloud network, essentially going after the idea that, hey, companies operate in multiple countries. Lots of countries now have laws that say, hey, your data within that country has to stay in that country. Was locality and like country specific locality, was that a topic point or a discussion point much this week as you were talking about it? Because it feels like, again, it goes into that, like, it'd be nice to be able to build something that extends anywhere and everywhere, but laws and regulations are starting to come back and sort of go, no, I need you to create locality around what you're doing. Are you seeing much discussion around that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the discussion was in the context of also, Andy Jassy always talking about how 90% of the work is still done on-prem, and the data doesn't support that. I don't know what you guys think, but I would say it's more like 45 to 50% of the work is being done in the cloud. And if you look at the cloud numbers, notwithstanding the Microsoft's the leak on how big their Azure business was or is versus what we all thought, but notwithstanding that, I think we're reaching this sort of state of balance, optimization, equilibrium, whatever you want to call it, where stuff that should be in the cloud is in the cloud. And there's a lot more activity going on for new apps in the cloud, but the stuff that hasn't moved to the cloud probably won't, because you can get, essentially that cloud experience. And for the reasons you just mentioned, there's instances where you want to run your own cloud. So that did come up. Of course, not surprising, guys like VMware spoke about it, although they're really, doubling down on their whole cross-cloud play. And I think they're optimistic that Broadcom's not going to kill that. But I think it's a viable point that you're making, is that the market is sort of stabilizing now. Guy on Hinchcliffe from Constellation Research, I don't know if you saw it on Twitter, he put out a pretty detailed study on this topic. He interviewed, I think, 22 CIOs. He's tight with a bunch of them. And they basically said, look, we're kind of settling down, and this is when we use cloud, and this is when we use on-prem. And, data sovereignty was one of those big items where it was a key decision point to stay on-prem.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Andy Jassy quote about 10% on prem. That's one of those quotes that's come out a whole bunch of different ways. It always just depends on, kind of follow the money, right? Andy always wants to make every day will be the first inning forever. Used to have Ginny Rometty and IBM said like only 25%, and that always felt like sort of a defensive statement that the cloud hadn't passed them by. It's funny that neither one of them sort of want to claim that the cloud has really evolved all that much, but for very, very different reasons. And every company seems to be in between those two pillars.
It's true. It's very true.
We've learned a lot from the cloud, haven't we? Two pizza teams working backwards, right? It's all become sort of de rigueur now, and so cloud has been good for the industry.
Yeah.
So, Dave, are you seeing, take out your crystal ball for a second? And I know you mentioned a bunch of companies already, but is there any companies or technologies that you think is going to break away from the pack in this chaos that's kind of developed around SuperCloud?
John and I talk about this all the time on our Cube Pod. It's like, will this trend benefit incumbents, or is it going to be more beneficial to disruptors? And he's in the I'd love to know what you guys think. He's in the disruptor camp. I feel like it's more like the internet. Think about the internet, in terms of the real disruptors. Yeah, it was Amazon and maybe eBay, and there's a handful of folks. But in general, I would argue that the internet benefited the incumbents more than it did, the disruptors. And I think you're going to see something similar here. And the reason I think that is because they got the resources, they have the data, and they're less dismissive, even though a lot of people are dismissing ChatGPT as a toy. Big mistake, in my opinion. But I think generally companies today, technology companies, are less dismissive than they were when you go back to, when I was coming into the industry. Ken Olsen was saying Unix is snake oil, and so PCs are a joke. And so I think companies are have many more startup activities going on and incubator activities, and they still have blind spots, no question. But I think because they have so much data and they have such a large install base, I think the incumbents are going to definitely benefit from this. And I think, as always, somebody's going to come out of the blue with a new business model. I'm not sure it's going to be search, advertising, or subscriptions. I don't know what it is, but somebody with AI is going to come out with a new business model that we haven't thought of and people are paying attention to, and then it's going to rule the world. That's my call.
Yeah, I'm super curious. I'm sort of curious about two things, right? Like we've mentioned this a million times on the podcast. Like, I'm curious if the behaviors that were driven when it was zero interest rates will happen again, right? So, just as an example, like Snowflake became a phenomenon. Everybody was like, put all your data in Snowflake. Well, now that things are a little tighter, you're seeing all these people say, well, maybe I'll only put 3 years of data in Snowflake or 2 years of data in Snowflake, right? And so, you had certain things that were like, when everything is super inexpensive, behaviors happen, business models can happen, but when things get a little tighter, they don't. So I'm curious to see what a couple of years of, things tighter will drive for some of this stuff. The other one I think is it's going to be really interesting to see how many companies are willing to come out and say, like, the core of what we do is driven by AI, not the cloud guys, right? Like, obviously Google wants to say everything they do is AI or whatever, but like, I think there's going to be a weird thing of being like, we've displaced a ton of people with AI. I think there's going to be just sort of like, keep that quiet. Like, if you're doing it, do it, but keep it quiet. So I think AI is going to have an interesting sort of use case, I guess, or like case study that it is going to be interesting to sort of watch how many people are willing to claim that they're not really behind the magic that they, the technologists love to claim, versus being like, oh, no, I created the magic. I think that's going to be interesting to watch.
So I think here's where I think the disruption can come. If I had to take the other side of the argument, we've been working on a model of the future of data apps, and we've been using Uber as a sort of a metaphor. And so if you think about what Uber does, they basically built a digital representation of their business. They get drivers and riders, ETAs, destinations, pricing, and those are all different data types. So we're envisioning this world where you have a semantic layer that takes all those data types, makes them coherent, it allows you to build apps on top of it. And if you think about, so Uber basically did this in 2015. They brought it on top of Google Spanner, and then they built essentially their own semantic layer, so that in real time, the Uber app, you think about what it does. It takes people, places, and things and puts them in your hand in your app in real time. Is amazing what it does. So we think increasingly that the data is going to inform the state of your business, and you're going to want to, in real time, whether it's supply chain or transactions or inferencing at the edge, that those data apps are going to require a whole new set of infrastructure and data platforms, and potentially even, different semiconductor types at the edge. And so a lot of disruption from an economic standpoint and technology standpoint could come from these new data apps, which could drive a lot of new value in the industry. And again, we use sort of Uber as a good example. They built this in 2015, and if they had to do it again today, they'd probably do it differently. But I guess the point being, Uber has thousands of engineers. We think every company is going to want that, and so there's an opportunity for somebody to develop, these horizontal technologies. Obviously, open source is going to be a huge part of that, so that any company can take advantage of that model.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, Dave, you have been an absolute trooper this week. Folks don't know you were supposed to be in the studios. You guys had a lightning strike. You've been recording this from your car, so we appreciate you. Plus, you flew all night to get home from California. So we're super appreciative of you giving us the time this morning. Real quick, if folks want to find all the ways that either you're doing it through analysis and podcast, or you and Dave are doing it, what are the good places to find all the good Dave Vellante information and insights these days?
Yeah, thanks for that. So siliconangle.com is our main site. That's where we get most of our traffic. And then supercloud.world is where you'll see all the various SuperCloud content. It's actually quite good. I still go back to SuperCloud 1. There's such good content there. And then I publish weekly on wikibon.com or Breaking Analysis. I appreciate you guys, getting the word out on that as well. And thecube.net is where all our videos are. So, and guys, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. Well, listen, Aaron, why don't you take us home, wrap us up, and get us out of here?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Dave, again, one more shout out for being quite a trooper and the consummate professional for it. Thank you very much. For behalf of Brian and myself, everyone out there, thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend. Help us build the community. If you can leave a review wherever you get your podcast, please consider doing that as well. And we're always looking for additional topics. If you have ideas on topics or guests, get in touch with us. We're still using Twitter. Maybe not as much, but we're still using Twitter. And of course, email us at show@thecloudcast.net for both feedback and suggestions. So with that, I'm going to close out the Cloudcast for this week, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.